Welcome to the Postgame. Welcome to the whole crew. Welcome to the esteemed Professor Richard Wolff. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Much to get to. Not a little bit tighter on time than we usually are, but we still have a lot that we will get to, folks. From the UK to Bolivia to the 18th century Brumaire. But joining us, as he always does on Tuesdays, is the great Ben Burgis. He's author of Give Them an Argument, Logic for the Left. He also teaches logic and philosophy at Perimeter College in Atlanta. And he is the proprietor of a great Patreon page, of which I am a patron. Ben Burgis, are you ready for your song, Professor Wolff? You might want to put on your headphones. Or no worries. Don't put on your headphones. We're going to just blare this on the speakers. Professor Burgis, are you ready for your song, sir?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, let's go. I want to go to mockery really badly.
I will.
So please go.
Okay.
You got to restrain me. Keep on calling it. Logical analysis. You're going to show us how to argue that. Go.
This is based on data from a bunch of different countries. There's abundant evidence that at this point that's bullshit. Breaking down these right-wing arguments and looking at how they're supposed to fit together.
Okay, break it down. Break it down. Break it down, Ben. Ben, welcome.
Thank you.
So Ben, I've been absolutely enraged and despairing over this coup in Bolivia. It's very important to always remind people that Evo Morales has significantly cut poverty. And actually, apropos of some of what we've been talking about on mic, off mic, I think he's made some moves in a redistributive direction that are significant, and is also, and one of the reasons I think he survived for a relatively long period of time, he managed the economy quite well, including according to the Financial Times. Now, as countless nerds remind me on Twitter, Evo Morales was not a heavenly perfected vehicle of gurudom who never committed any mistakes. So therefore, undoubtedly, he probably deserves this. I also would just like to say, and I mean this seriously, Ben, I'll get to you in a second. There were some people who suggested that part of the reason that he was removed in this literal coup, which we're going to see some footage of. This is actually good footage. This is of supporters of the government and indigenous rights waving flags, saying now's the time for a civil war, which is an incredible tragedy, but there has just been a coup. Some people are actually saying that the right-wing junta that are burning indigenous people's flags and just planted a Bible at the presidential palace and have been burning and looting and threatening members of Evo Morales' family, that the reason that this happened is because they're really upset with his policies in the Amazon. And I just would like to say for those people, I doubt you're watching this on the Postgame, but we probably will clip this later. If you believe that, totally fascinating point, and I would like to recommend, I have some real estate opportunities I'd like to tell you about. I have some penny stock opportunities I'd like to tell you about. I'm making a film that I'd like you to invest in. I have a demo tape that I think if you could put the right investment behind, I could be the top of the charts. Literally anything that I could sell you, I would. Could I David and I just recently inaugurated a multi-level marketing scheme. So if you believe that the right-wing anti-indigenous opposition, almost certainly backed by the CIA and embraced by the Trump administration, fomenting a coup against Evo Morales, was doing it because they were tired of the extraction economy, I would love to talk literally any type of business opportunity with you that involved you sharing your money with me.
Yeah.
Yes. So, Ben, you're going to debunk some of these profoundly obnoxious, disgusting defenses of this coup, and you're going to use a great piece in the Jacobin called "A Few Tips on How to Understand American Coups" by the scholar Greg Grandin.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would also, as far as what may have caused this, I would gently nudge the portion of the people who think stuff like that, who are capable of thinking, to think about lithium instead.
Right.
That this is to electric cars, as Guatemalan bananas were to the United Fruit Company. A tremendous portion of the world's reserves of lithium seem to be in Bolivia. Evo Morales just said that he wasn't going to allow private extraction, was going to keep that in public hands. He also, something else that just happened is he just won an election. And this is a really important point because the Organization of American States asserted without evidence that irregularities corrupted the election to the point where the result is worthless. There's a statistical analysis from the CEPR think tank that suggests that that's not true, that in fact it looks like statistical analysis of election returns, the Center for Economic and Policy Research, does not bear out this claim. So we have a government that was just democratically.
Just to be really clear, I want to we got to be tight. I'm sorry, but just to interject, this report is put out by Mark Rice-Brott and Guillermo Long, who will be a guest on next week, who's a former Ecuadorian foreign minister. And basically, to simplify it, they say that there is a mechanism that the OAS recommends, that the Bolivians agreed to, that is a pre-official vote tabulator. That, by the way, that tabulator, Evo still won in that. It just was close enough that it would go to a runoff.
Right.
The official vote came in, and the full official vote that was not reflected in the non-official tabulation included rural areas and areas significant to the Evo Morales base, pushing him up to 47%, which incidentally, 47% and losing seats in Congress is not exactly a let's rig this thing kind of result. Right. So it is very analogous to Shama Sawant winning her election. The first results were that she was behind. And I was depressed. I thought she lost. And people around said, no. Actually, her campaign is optimistic because this tally is not in her strongholds, not in the votes that she's expecting. And this loss margin that we have so far is close enough to push her over the top. And indeed, that's what happened. It's quite analogous to what happened in Bolivia. And the OAS that sounds so official, who have said elections in Haiti are illegitimate after the U.S. has demanded they do it, that's what they're hanging their hat on. They don't have a bunch of examples. They don't have we have photographs of burned ballots or anything like that. That's what they have. And every single newspaper and mainstream media in the United States has uncritically repeated that. And I'm sorry to prolong the segment and interrupt, but I just think this is really important to be clear about.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, and the reason this is important is because there are all these people out there. You've probably, if you've been off on, Twitter and stuff, you probably run into a few today who say, no, it's not really a military coup. Really, this is so complicated that this doesn't count as a real, true, official, according to Hoyle, military coup. And the first and most important point to be made about this, and this gets down to a question of what, we could be all nerdy and call conceptual analysis, right? We've got a disputed definition here, military coup. What's the best definition? The definition that I'm working with, I think you're working with, I think most reasonable people are working with, is that if a democratically elected government is overthrown by the military, that would be a military coup. Pretty simple. But there are all these people who say, no, but look at all these bad things that Evo Morales has done. As you just admitted earlier, he's not, in fact, a perfect chief executive, which is the standard for being allowed to stay in office after you win an election.
Particularly if you're governing a country in the periphery that is the subject to U.S. aggression and oligarchic extremism. That's when you really better be perfect.
So yeah, absolutely. So here's, and it's obviously, you can think about all the obvious. I wonder if there was a military coup in the United States or England or France, would people be splitting quite these same hairs about exactly what the definition was? But if nothing else, military coups having happened a lot in the last 65 years, since Arbenz, in Latin America. If you want to argue about the definition, you said, no, this isn't really a military coup like those other military coups because of X, Y, and Z. As Grandin points out in this great article, and he's knee deep in this stuff. He wrote a book on Kissinger. He's very good on these topics. And so Grandin points out, says, there has never been a coup in Latin America where the president being overthrown wasn't in some way or another problematic. Yes, even Allende. 2, there has never been a coup in Latin America that didn't have some degree of popular support. And just to underline this, I think if we imagine circumstances in which that could actually be a military coup in the United States, socialist government, that sort of thing, it's not hard to imagine a big chunk of the population supporting the coup. That doesn't stretch the imagination any. 3, if the military intervenes, if the president agrees to protest demands, it's a coup. In fact, pretty much any time the military intervenes to change regimes, that's a coup. 4, the main driver of destabilization need not be the CIA or international capital for the outcome of the coup to benefit them. In other words, it's not enough to say, oh, there's homegrown, domestic, organic opposition to the government that has nothing to do with the CIA or international capital, because guess what? That's going to be true in every case. These are complicated societies.
I'd also, if you believe that members of the Latin American right or oligarchy care about judicial independence and democracy, I'd like to reiterate my real estate offer.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, well, I think we've seen in the last couple of years just how much they care about proper judicial process. In the case of Lula da Silva in Brazil, which people watching this may have heard of. So that is quite a turnaround that they're suddenly so concerned with this. Finally, just to skip to the last one, and I think this is an incredibly important point, and Grandin puts this so well that I'm not going to try to improve on it. I'm just going to read out this last point. When assessing comparable negatives of the contending sides vying for power, always a good exercise when you want to virtue signal your nuanced position, distinct from evil rightists and ideological leftists. Don't forget to weigh the future in your deliberations. For instance, a few years ago in Brazil, a number of leftists pointed out that the Workers' Party, PT, was indeed corrupt and cut off from its base. Now, as we hurtle towards the climate apocalypse and see the nature of Bolsonaro, perhaps we assign a few more points to the PT side of that conflict.
Indeed. I mean, I would quibble with some of that description, but that's exactly it. Professor Wolff, do you have anything to add?
No, it's just you don't need to have a debate about how much is local and how much. The CIA knows that in each of these countries, there's a highly concentrated core of very wealthy people who have spent 200 years accumulating their wealth, buying the professionals to protect them, whether it's lawyers or accountants, and working with the church often to have a base in the society. They understand all of this, and they're ready to work with the United States to help them keep the control that they have had for a long time. So they'll always be partners for the United States inside, typically also controlling media and so on, so that they can make it look that they have a bigger base than they actually do, because they're doing that all the time. And so we shouldn't be having a debate, how much is the United States involved? First of all, we'll never know, because all this stuff is done in secret. And number two, it doesn't really matter. They would have done a coup without the United States if they could get away with it. Probably they couldn't, and so they needed help from the United States. They got that help. That's the way this is done.
Go back to the Emmanuel Wallerstein piece that I did recently. I mean, this is centers and peripheries, and this is the parasitic relationship, exactly, between the local elites and the global hegemon. And the bottom line is lithium access for outside foreign direct investors. And I mean, and just the amount of just. There is a certain number of people who really confuse just being in their heads for intellectualism. I don't care if he had a fucking referendum to seek a fourth term. The Supreme Court signed off on it, incidentally, and the guy won. And what you're about to see, and a lot of people are embarrassing themselves because you already see it. I mean, 48 hours ago or even 24 hours ago, like, I don't know, there's a lot of people upset and the official opposition isn't very right wing. And now you see these people they drag the mayor out of her house. They put her in body paint, sheared her hair off. They're burning people's homes. They're ripping up indigenous flags. They're appearing in masks and ripping people out of parliament. All of that nice stuff about the Amazon and extraction and human rights. That's for you gullible fucking morons. That's not what they're doing.
No.
Ben Burgis.
And just one last thing about this. All this great Greg Grandin stuff we've been going over, and a really essential article is about the history of these coups going back to Arbenz and Allende. But you don't have to go that far back.
Yep.
2009, there was a coup in Honduras, and I remember all these, that's not a real coup. It's not, It doesn't, I check all the boxes arguments in 2009 about Honduras. In fact, they had a slightly better argument then, because in Honduras, at least the army got a court to agree with them. But it's the same basic shape of the argument. And it's like, no, this isn't a coup because Zelaya did things that constitutionally overstepped. He did this, that, and the other thing. So it's not really a coup, even though the elected government is being overthrown by the military. And check out the history of the last 10 years in Honduras. Do some Google searches for Honduras and search terms like death squads and disappeared journalists. If you if you think that a military coup against the elected government, no matter what your criticisms are of Evo Morales, if you think this is going to lead to anything good, you're like one of these people who 3 years after the invasion of Iraq was clamoring to invade Iran.
Exactly. Ben Burgis, as always, we appreciate you. And for those of you still clamoring to delusions about Evo Morales, again, we all have business propositions for you. Ben Burgis, thank you so much.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. All right, let's go to the UK. I want to play this piece of sound for you, Professor Wolff, because I actually thought it was significant, and I'd like you to give us your take on the election. But the whole smear and the whole strategy against Jeremy Corbyn is this anti-Semitism smear. It's the one thing they've gotten to stick. And this is the former Speaker of the House. He's just retired, John Bercow. He's the guy who wears the wig or whatever, the robe, and says, order, order, all of that. And he's Jewish. He's also a very moderate, but a member of the Conservative Party. Here he is with Alistair Campbell talking about Jeremy Corbyn's supposed anti-Semitism, and actually a lot more. And I'd like you to comment on it and then talk about Labour beyond that. And let's turn on the speakers for Professor Wolff.
One final thing, you're Jewish. What's your sense been of the Labour Party anti-Semitism debate?
I think that racism is a challenge across society, and after decades in which huge advances were made, I think there is a real danger of regression now. Now, I know you didn't ask more widely about racism, but that's my answer on racism. You asked about anti-Semitism. And I think it is a big challenge. I don't want to intrude on the grief of a particular political party. All I would say is that, yes, it's an issue and it needs to be addressed, but I myself have never experienced anti-Semitism from a member of the Labour Party, point one. And point two, though there is a big issue and it has to be addressed, I do not myself believe Jeremy Corbyn is anti-Semitic. That is my honest view. You haven't asked me explicitly, but you've nevertheless drawn me, and I want to make that point. I'm not saying that he doesn't have a challenge in his party. I'm not saying that. It is an issue and it does need to be addressed, and I respect those who are very concerned about it, but I don't believe Jeremy Corbyn is anti-Semitic. I've known him for the 22 years that I've been in Parliament. Even actually when I was a right-winger, we got on pretty well. He was quite a personable individual.
Voted him with him more often than he did with the Labour government.
Well, he was certainly a persistent and prolific rebel. He's been very supportive of me. He's been very supportive of me, and I've never detected so much as a whiff of anti-Semitism.
Have you ever experienced anti-Semitism outside Parliament? You said you hadn't experienced it from anybody in the Labour Party. What about outside Parliament?
Yes. Yes, I have.
Like?
Well, I remember somebody once saying to me, and I'm not going to say who, somebody once saying to me, you know, if I had my way, people like you, Burgis, wouldn't be in this place. And I said to this individual, when you say people like me, do you mean people like me in the sense that I'm lower class or Jewish? To which he replied, both.
That was actually a pretty powerful clip, but I'd like your thoughts on it and Labour in general.
Well, on the anti-Semitism, you know, when societies are in decline or threatened, the anxiety can become intense. The fear that things are spinning out of control can become intense. And one refuge people find, there are several, you know, some people drink too much, some people run away to a rural area and hope they will escape the problems. Some people use drugs and all of that. But there's another kind of escape, which is to suddenly rediscover some group that you can claim is yours, that you are part of it and it is part of you. And by solidarity with that group, coupled with hostility and denunciation of the other group, you feel safer. You are protecting you begin to develop this partisan identification, let's call it. So, for example, I see in the United States that the crushing of the American dream, of the opportunity for millions of Americans to hold on to the little bit of middle-class taste they got in the last 2 or 3 decades of the 20th century, is being taken away from them. And they're right, it is. And that frightens them. And it then becomes an opportunity for right-wing people looking for a political lever to say, you know, you're suffering not because the capitalism is in decline in your part of the world, which is the truth. No, that's an unacceptable idea. It's because you are part of this community that is being unfairly hurt for the benefit of that community which is other than you. And if you get together with people like yourself, right, you can prevent that.
Trumpism.
That's right. You can find a savior. You can find a champion. And he will not let you be sacrificed. You know, somebody has to be sacrificed. You're kind of aware of that. You just don't want it to be you. It's nothing personal against those other people. But then the symbolism, and I'll get to the thing in the anti-Semitism in a minute, but the symbolism, which was really coincidental, that you had a black man as president for 8 years, was the way that enabled Trump and people like him to galvanize the declining anxiety and say, see, they're going to give it to their people at your expense. I will protect you and stick it to them. Right. That's your choice. And so in England, the decline is further along than the United States. England's empire was lost as the Americans rose to replace it. And the English have been struggling for a long time to cope with their decline. I mean, remember, Britain was the empire upon which the sun never set. Right. You know, Britannia rules the waves, blah, 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 all of that. And they are now hurtling back to what they once were 500 years ago, which is a cold, damp, offshore island of Europe. That's what they are. And that's where they're going.
Hear that, British people? Unless you're a patron, I mean, then you're a beautiful country. And
it's very hard.
Jolly-o.
It's very hard.
We're going to go buy castles when we get to 5,000 patrons over there.
And so what you had is the same thing. The Brexit movement is an attempt to say the Europeans are sticking it to you. If you were really British and pushed all of those Polish workers that are fixing your plumbing out, and if you got rid of those Pakistani and all the others that they know, then we could have Britain for the British, and we would be okay because those people wouldn't be taking or stealing or welfaring. It's very old. Okay, now, when you do that, you also make it possible to rediscover an identity. And the identity is not just, we are the British, but all the others that may have at some point played the role of the endangerment coming at us can be revived.
Right.
Dark-skinned people, foreign people, mainland Europeans, and of course Jews. I mean, of course Jews. So it's a grab bag. Whatever particular history you've had in this part of England or that, with some story, you may be more sensitive to that demonization of Jews than you are to Indians or Pakistanis or Europeans or Polish plumbers or whatever it is. And so I agree with the fellow. That's an issue. But it's the symptom. It's not the issue the way he describes it. That's misunderstanding where this comes from and what its causes are. And the solution, therefore, can never be what you're getting, which is appeals to declarations. This is not about declarations, and it's not about appeals. I mean, you do that if you want, but you're not dealing with the problem is, if you permit this system to do what it is organized to do, when capitalism left the West, starting in the 1970s, it was done. Way more money can be made in India, China, Brazil, places like that. They are going where the profits are. The workers in China are much cheaper to hire, and it's the fastest growing market for output in the world. For a capitalist enterprise to not take advantage either of the cheaper labor or of the fastest growing market is a capitalist who hasn't read the ABCs of how to be a capitalist. That's not going to happen. So they're gone. They're leaving Europe, they're leaving Japan, they're leaving the United States. And that means capitalism is rising there, and it's over here. It's in decline. And there are two things that happen. Denial, because it's too painful. And there the British are fantastic. I mean, they've been denying it for a century. I mean, it's very serious. They've had, which I understand. I mean, it's very hard to face that, given the ideas you've had about your Britishness over such a long time. That this is very hard. And the second thing is, you look for scapegoats. You look for people to blame. You do that. But if you don't deal with the economic,
well, is Corbyn the answer to that? And specifically,
he could be.
Yeah,
he could be.
Talk about labor.
Yeah, the labor. Look. The conservatives are hopeless. There's nothing there. What they're doing, and this is very important for Americans to understand, they're taking care, as always happens in capitalism, that as the system goes down, it's the cry, and I only know this in French, sauve qui peut, which in English is translated usually every man for himself. The thing is falling apart. And the people in the best position to hold on to what they have are the top.
Right.
And the further down the social ladder you go, the more vulnerable people are, that the difficulty of decline is pushed off those at the top and on to you. That's been going on in Britain for a long time. I don't know if you're aware of it, but real wages in England dropped since the crash of 2008. In this country, they're stagnant. In Britain, they dropped 10, 15%. I mean, that unfriggin' believable. You're making the country more unequal. It already was very unequal. This is felt viscerally by millions of British people. They want something. The conservatives offer them nothing but scapegoats. They offer them the European. If we leave Europe, that doesn't change either, because the Europeans are going to compete with them rather than work deals out. They're going to push more bitterness on the lower part. So the notion that masses of British people, that can't be explained by any rational calculus about economics. That has to be demonization, scapegoating. The same thing here in the United States. So there is a problem with anti-Semitism because it's just a convenient scapegoating mechanism. Having said that, I think it's disgusting what the effort has been made to use this politically against him. by the moderates in his party, the Tony Blair people who sold that party out and who have been defeated soundly by Mr. Corbyn and the hundreds of thousands of young people brought into the Labour Party. They're bitter. They're looking for anything. And they came up with that they don't have the decency not to do that is pathetic on their part, very dangerous. As to Corbyn's program, there again, the problem is, look, he's way better than the Conservatives because at least he talks about radical change to help the mass of people. And that's honest. That's consistent with him and with the Labour Party. I'm particularly taken by his shadow chancellor, John McDonnell, who's
very impressive,
very serious kind of guy. But I would support them eagerly. But they too are afraid of dealing with the level of fundamental social change that is the only solution. And I think that weakens them. I think they do it because they think the British people can't go further. On the other hand, John McDonnell has said, let me remind you what he said, because it's very important for Americans to get this. If we win the election, we will pass a law, and the law will say any company that's functioning here in England, capitalist company, can continue as it is. We won't bother you. But if you come to a moment where either A, you're going to close, or B, you're going to move out of the country, or C, you're going to sell yourself to another company, a merger, or D, you're going to do an IPO, become a shareholding company, the law will say you have to give at that moment the right of first refusal to your workers to buy you out and convert it into a worker co-op. And when pressed by the press, well, where in the hell are the workers going to get the money to buy the company? He smiles, looks into the camera, and says, our government will lend it to them.
That is revolutionary.
Yes.
That's serious.
That's amazing. You know?
Yes.
And my hat goes off because that's a fundamental change in the organization of production. That's what revolution, in the old sense, always meant. And he's at least talking about it. By comparison, Elizabeth Warren has nothing to say on the subject, and Bernie makes gestures of being interested in co-ops.
Well, he has the workplace democracy plan.
Yeah, but it's very vague. He even mentions, he got it from Corbyn anyway, or from those people, but he doesn't dare get specific, sharp, and clear the way McDonnell has done.
Well, he accelerated it. I want to play a couple clips. We have a few more things to get to. First, Professor Wolff. This is a really short clip, and I actually thought it was you, the Eye of the Tiger clip. And I don't mean to spring this on you. Okay. If it is you, I apologize. There's some dispute. This was put out on Twitter just the other day, and it was either one or two of my heroes. Let's see this. This just released yesterday. We can play the sound. Let's risk it. Oh, it's from President Lula. Yes. This is President Lula's Twitter team released this tape on the day he was released from prison.
Really?
And I love it. Yeah, we should put it down.
Definitely the best exercising politician.
Yes, Lula greater than Tulsi. Absolutely the better thirst trap videos. That's just so awesome that he puts that out. Taking the blood pressure check, doing the work.
Straight to
that's
ankles.
a fit gentleman. I think what's incredible to me. I mean, first of all, I know Professor Wolff you like in one of his. Not in his very first speech, even before the big address he did at the Metalworkers Union, when he was thanking everybody at Curitiba at the vigil, he said, I came out more left-wing. That was one of the first things he said. And then he had a long section in his speech at the Metalworkers Union about Uber and temp jobs and the informal economy and how that, the effect of that on labor organizing. So you have this global stature, global statesman, a guy who actually really knows how to communicate. I think that that's really important. You know, you watch these interviews, and I mean, I think Bernie and I think Corbyn are great communicators. I think McDonnell's a great communicator, but there's a charisma, there's an earthiness, and there's a humor to it that so many people try to replicate. And that's why Steve Bannon said that he'll cause a great disturbance in Brazil and is the idol of the globalists. So
He said that?
He said that in Brazil. Yes, he did. And I think they're right about the threat that Lula poses to both systems. I mean, I've heard, and again, you hear a lot of things, and I don't know the specifics, but I've heard it from people that are credible that there's a back channel between Corbyn and Varoufakis and Lula about what the actual answer to neoliberalism is. So I think that's promising.
I think certainly the Labour Party in England, whatever it's doing now in terms of its election, I understand Mr. Farage just withdrew, that they're not going to contest.
Yeah, this is really bad.
The Tories and all of that.
The
Be nice
Brexit
if
Party will not contest Tory party seats.
Yeah,
and
the Lib
that's-
Dems should not do it to Labour then.
Yeah, but they won't because the center always breaks fascist when given an opportunity.
But I think the real enduring contribution that Labour has made is this willingness to put out there that we're not about the government having another program of welfare. We're about the government being the midwife for a fundamental transformation in the organization of work.
Right.
Wow. Because, you asked me earlier about Lenin. In the early days, early months of the revolution, Lenin gave a very famous speech in which he was asked, what have we accomplished? And he said, well, here's what we've accomplished. We have replaced private capitalism with state capitalism. We have taken over the industry. They are now owned and operated by the government. And it's a government run by a party of the working class, our party, the Bolshevik Party. That's an amazing achievement, and I am very confident that we can now go to the next step, which is to use the government and its control of industry as a state to take us beyond capitalism. That never happened.
Right.
He died, and Stalin had a different agenda, mostly because they couldn't do it. That has to be faced. Most people don't pay attention to that speech of Lenin's, although they ought to.
Sounds like maybe the most important speech.
Yes.
Yeah.
And now you see, in a different context, in a different country, Labor has come to the point where it understands it has to make a credible program. You can't keep rerunning the same movie. People get bored. In the Great Depression, we had a revolutionary moment. You could have had a revolution here in the United States, like the one in Russia. Everybody knew that. Roosevelt knew it. Or you could have a reform. It was a classic reform versus revolution moment. And everybody went for reform. Okay, I understand it. You may have been right that it was not enough strength to make a revolution, but you made the reform. You didn't transform the production. You left the capitalist industries in the hands of the capitalists. You taxed them. You built Social Security, you gave social welfare, and you made the rich and corporations pay for most of it. You did that. Amazing. New Deal. Wonderful. But it wasn't a revolution. And then because of that, you left the capitalists in a position. What did they do in the subsequent 40 or 50 years? They used their position at the heads of business and the profits they got into their hands to undo the New Deal, which is where we are now. You can't historically call on the mass of the working class to do that again, because we've been there and we've done that, and it didn't solve the problem. You won't get the working class to make an uprising for another New Deal. And that's my fear, that in their guts, working people know there's got to be there's got to be something more we do, because what we did last time, which was good for a while, wasn't durable. And the people who figured out how to undo the New Deal will know how to do it faster next time, because they've learned it the first time. That can't be our program. What McDonnell and the Labour Party and Corbyn are doing is saying, you're right, they get that. we're going to take there aren't going to be private capitalists left to undo. We're going to do a reform, but we're going to do the revolution because that's the only way reform is durable.
Right. Let's do that reform. The only revolution is the only way reform is durable. I like that. All right, let's do a few more pieces of sound. Let's do Uber first. This is a classic in the annals of Silicon Valley corporate social responsibility. And I believe, so they're supposed to do a forum in Saudi Arabia, right? That's the context of this, an investment forum in Saudi. I will say, and I don't want to in any way minimize the just obscenity of the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, or by the way, the role that Israeli private intelligence firms played in it. And it is one of the most gruesome things to happen. That said, I mean, maybe the fixation of this question should Uber be going there while Saudi Arabia commits genocide in Yemen? That being said, they focus on Jamal Khashoggi, and the CEO of Uber, he shows you that Silicon Valley is very committed to corporate social responsibility.
I want to ask you about Saudi Arabia. Last year, you chose not to go to the big Saudi Arabian government's investment conference after the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. And you said that you wanted to wait for more facts to emerge. We're now at a point subsequent to that. The CIA has assessed that the Saudi government, including the Crown Prince, had a role in that murder. You also decided not to go this year. Did you not go this year because of the Khashoggi situation?
We had a board meeting at the same time.
Well, that's convenient, but you're the CEO. You probably could have rescheduled that.
We scheduled board meetings years and years ahead. It wasn't...
Would you, if your board meeting had not been that day, would you have gone?
I don't know if I would have.
You also, Saudi Arabia is your fifth largest shareholder. You have the head of the Sovereign Wealth Fund on your board. Do you believe he should stand for re-election to the board?
I think he's been a very constructive board member, Yasser has. And I personally have valued his input greatly. It's up to him whether he wants to stand for re-election.
But from your opinion, he represents and works for a government which you believe had a role in the murder of a journalist who was a U.S. resident. Should that person be on the board of a U.S. company?
I think that government said that they made a mistake.
Somebody's dead.
Listen, it's a serious mistake. We've made mistakes too, right? With self-driving. And we stopped driving, and we're recovering from it.
Wait a second, a self-driving car mutilated somebody? This would be amazing news if that was true. I'm sorry. Yeah.
It
did kill them.
Listen, it's a serious mistake. We've made mistakes too, right? With self-driving, and we stopped driving, and we're recovering from that mistake. So I think that people make mistakes. It doesn't mean that they can never be forgiven. I think they've taken it seriously. And
the CIA didn't suggest that they made a mistake and that it was an oversight. Like with self-driving, that was basically a bad sensor, correct? The CIA suggested that the Crown...
Just to clarify what happened there, basically the car that they were modifying with their AI technology had a technology in it that would help a car stop in case somebody, for instance, jaywalked. Uber disarmed that for their own software, which wasn't able to identify jaywalkers, and it smashed into somebody. So mistakes happen.
Crown Prince had a role in ordering an assassination. It's a different thing. You guys didn't intentionally run somebody over.
I didn't read that part of the CIA report. You're obviously deeper in it. But I think from a Saudi perspective, they're just like any other shareholder, right? Now we're a public company. Anyone can invest in our company if they choose to do so. And they're a big investor, just like you could be a big investor as well.
I don't think I can be as big as the Saudis.
That'll be hard.
That'll be tough.
I love how if you get the Axios guy to give you that level of sarcasm, that says everything. But beyond the, it's great television and he's a scumbag and it's fun. Is this also, though, another lesson about the shifting axis of capitalism? In other words, that even if they wanted to make the PR move, they could do that to a smaller investor. They could say, hey, this, no, you know what, this smaller, leader or whatever has a little bit of money kicked in. No, get that out of here. We get a nice press release out of it. The money in the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund and the shifting nature of the capital needs of Western companies, they couldn't do that even if they wanted the PR move.
No, look, it's... This is the way capitalism has always worked. It's a profit-driven system. The people who run it will tell you profit is our bottom line. We're either going to get more profit or we're going to get a bigger market share, which is ultimately to give us a bigger profit, etc. Capitalists have their goals, their objectives. They need to get the money to do it. They need to keep their shareholders happy. If you make Saudi Arabia unhappy by saying something critical, they'll dump your stock, or at least they might, and that'll drive the price down, and that'll make life difficult for the rest of you. That's not how you grow a company, blah, blah. They're just doing business, and they don't want to be told about. It's sort of like the military. They don't want to be told about collateral damage. The very phrase gives it away. It's not our central purpose here. It's a side event.
It's an externality.
Yes, they killed a journalist. It wasn't nice. I wish they'd been able to do it some other way, or that they hadn't made a mistake. They're so unconcerned in it. They don't even have a ready rationale. The rationale is crude and it's a mistake. It gets some bad publicity. It's so irrelevant to them. That's the important thing. It's irrelevant to them.
They tranquilized him and cut his body apart with a bone saw while he was still alive. I mean, I really want to underline this. And this guy, hey, look, what do you want me to do? He's not going to come to the buffet. He's an investor.
Yeah.
I mean,
they flew 12 goons in a special airplane, brought them in special vans, prepared them for this guy to arrive to get some document about getting married, and murdered him. I mean, this isn't complicated. They did that because the Saudi government doesn't want a critic writing for the Washington Post. It's not.
And also the message it sends. I mean, that's the other thing. And this is, by the way, I get the point about, hey, have a bigger conversation about Saudi and Yemen and everything. Absolutely. But when they do this to Jamal Khashoggi, and the CEO of Uber says that in an interview, what is the conclusion? We'll do this wherever the hell we want.
Absolutely.
Oh, there's a bad CIA report. Oh, what a bummer. Anyways, I'll be seeing the president next week. All right, 2 more pieces of sound, and then we'll quickly do a bad, and then we will let you go, because I know. But I do want to play this, because this is unbelievable. We'll do Elizabeth Warren, but I want to play this first. This is a weird way to get to this, but one, I mean, I would say, is what happening in Chile, that's of inspiration to you right now?
Yes, absolutely.
Do you know the slogan that some of them are chanting is that neoliberalism was born here and it will die here? And I think along with Ecuador and Haiti, now, this is true. I mean, this is so demented that even the Washington Post gave this thug a write-up. A Californian economist loves neoliberalism. When Chileans started protesting it, he opened fire. John, what is his name? I can't see.
Coben,
John
C-O-B-I-N.
Coben, a U.S.-based economist and former member of a neo-Confederate group, is so passionate about the free market and about Chile that he's devoted the past 2 decades to marrying the two. I mean, should be said, following in a fine tradition of crackpot U.S. corporate-enabled economists who have gone to wreak havoc in Chile.
George Mason also.
George, indeed. So this is footage of this professor. This is unbelievable. This is in Chile. He's in a car. I don't think there's sound. He hops out of his truck. He pulls a gun. Points it at protesters. They throw something at him. I guess it's not clear, but he actually let shots off.
He let shots fire, yeah. You can kind of see it if you look closer.
Let shots off. Now, this guy might end up being thrown in prison in Chile.
I'd hope.
My proposal was that that they do a direct flight and drop off in the middle of Havana.
Jesus, man.
So just bizarre. I mean, is that the logic of that economic system?
No, but I think, here's what it reminds me of. A year or 2 ago, I was in Europe for something, and I was watching television in my hotel room. And the screen came up, the Spanish Parliament. and I think it was still the right-wing president there, prime minister. And there was a vote in Parliament that the right wing had put up to reduce the weekly help for poor people, the welfare. And the government was pushing this reduction and the opposition was fighting it. That wasn't interesting. The right-wing deputies who all sat in one part of the parliament stood up, and the camera comes in and close on, must have been, I don't know, 70 of them or something, chanting. Their faces reminded me of pictures of Nazi rallies. They had an ecstasy of rage. Right. They were excited beyond words to take the money away from the poor, and they were shouting that the poor waste the money. The poor don't know how to live. The poor are destroying this country by taking resources that could make this country great, and they just sit around and drink wine. And you could see the visceral fascism just right there in front of you. These are people who have reorganized the world to make them, the richest of the rich, the most privileged ranks of Spanish society, the beleaguered victim, the one who is threatened in the wealth they have, in the lives they lead, in the mansions they occupy, by these dirty, poor, uneducated people who want it all. It's transfixing because it teaches that human beings, if you put them under enough pressure, will become monsters. And they will do monstrous things that will provoke the monster on the other side, and we will have the kinds of civil war that happen in these societies.
Could be right where Bolivia is heading right now.
Yeah.
And I mean, and again,
to burn and
right, right.
After what you've done to the indigenous people in that country for 250 years, you're in no position, but they are enraged.
They're enraged, and these nerds. I mean, they're so concerned about Morales. I don't think any of them know who Goni de la Sada is, who is living in Miami and is wanted for doing what they all claim without evidence, and we know for a fact Morales did not do this time, which was ordering the police on the street and murdering protesters. I believe that was in 2005. That was a major international incident. He's wanted for crimes against for that crime. The United States doesn't. I mean, the extradition request in the trash. Let's do 2 Elizabeth Warren clips because I don't like Elizabeth Warren, Professor. I like Bernie Sanders, and I hope that's. Well, I think that's frankly tremendous. There's a more serious one and a less serious one, but this one, I really want your perspective on this because whatever else we say about Bernie Sanders, I think Bernie Sanders, even the social democratic agenda in an American context, is off the charts, and I think it's the reform that will allow the breathing space to do more. But the rhetoric of structural change has really gotten watered down with the Warren candidacy, and I think this clip on Democracy Now! Really speaks to it. You can speak to the market aspect of it.
Senator Warren, you've said a crucial distinction between you and Bernie Sanders is that you're a capitalist and he's a socialist. Many activists, though, say that an economic system based on perpetual growth is fundamentally at odds with a stable, clean, and sustainable environment. How do you reconcile this?
So, the way I see this, I believe in markets. I think markets bring us a lot of innovation, a lot of creation, a lot of change. That's good. I want to see, for example, markets for clean, not just clean energy, but how we're going to clean the carbon out of the air, how we're going to clean the filth out of the water. But understand this, markets without rules are theft. They're theft. It allows, whenever you get a chance, when you have a market that people get to, corporations get to cheat people, that's theft. That's not a market. And that's not how markets are supposed to operate. So my efforts for many years now have been about how we get those markets to function so that we get the best out of the markets, but that people don't get cheated. And maybe the best example of that is in the early 2000s, I'll just give you an example. Toasters, I'm sorry, I'm not gonna start with my toaster story. I'll just start it with mortgages. Mortgages were so dangerous and so complex that someone who got a mortgage had a 1 in 5 chance of losing their home over that mortgage. Not through a fire, but through foreclosure. Communities of color were targeted for the worst of the worst mortgage. And the government, they weren't on the side of the people. They were deep in the pockets of the big banks. In fact, so deep that they let the big banks sell enough of those mortgages to crash the entire economy. So after that crash, I had an idea. And the idea was for a consumer agency.
Which is now in the hands of the Republicans and not helping very much. And I, not to be snarky, it's a great idea, but I think that actually goes back to the dynamic you articulated before about how deep reforms can actually go. But how do you grade that answer overall?
Well, for me, it's just a way of saying, hoping to say to those on the left who support Bernie, you can't get him because he's a socialist. So I'm the next best thing. You can go for me. And to the people who she hopes will realize that they can't put another centrist up, that the party, the mass of the people will not support it, that she's close enough that you can scoop up the progressives who will be grateful that they have her rather than a Biden or a Buttigieg or any of the other ones. So she's just positioning herself, and she said, the substance of what she says is silly. I mean, what is this? The pure market. We've never had that. What is this? You know, the socialists have a right to say, look, we think socialism is different from what these early experiments were, Russia, China. Because they were early experiments, they did things that we have to learn never to do again, and they did some things that we have to keep. And you can believe that because it's only but capitalism's been around for 300 years. It's had a lot of experiments, like every country on earth, and in every country on earth, the markets work in the way they work and not in this idealized libertarian fantasy. They just want to hold on to capitalism. So they have to create a magical one, a one in which the rules are. What do you think wealth does when you put in rules? It either goes around them, or it modifies them, or it gets rid of them. That's what it did every time. If you don't deal with the basic structure of capitalism, you're leaving in place the people who will undo the rules. Coming up with a new one, a consumer agent, oh, come on. I mean, that's why I said it before. We've been there. We've done that. If you don't take the wealth and power away from the core of the capitalists who have it, they will undo whatever you do. That's what they've always done. Why would you expect them not to do that again? Why are you afraid? Look, it's like a military. If you defeat another army, but you let them keep the guns and tanks and planes and bombs, you're looking for trouble. You have to disarm them, which all military people do, unless there's something else going on, so that the anger and upset of having been defeated will not come back. Right? So why are you letting the capitalists who brought you to this miserable collapse in 1929 keep the wealth and power they had and then undo the New Deal, and now you come to the next crisis they posted on us in 2008, and all you want to do is another batch of reforms that they will know how to undo quicker? I mean, this is crazy.
She doesn't center Bernie. Okay, we know the criticisms, and obviously I'm a fervent supporter, but I mean, the fact that he centers rent control, he centers single payer, that's a step towards decommodifying, not the next 21st century round of trying to bureaucratically wrangle with these much more powerful institutions. I want to play this on immigration because I think it's important, because Bernie actually just put out a very good immigration proposal. Now, I don't think Warren says anything that is really that shocking or out of place here. I think, look, I have a critique of this, obviously, but I think this is very important because there were a lot of people that were doing a lot of silly posturing about Warren somehow being to the left of Bernie. And this is the same. Yeah, this was a big spin that some people were,
left as Bernie.
So, or as left as Bernie. I don't know whether they were trying to actually convince themselves of this story or convince other people. But this is in the same week that Bernie Sanders, the only candidate to say no ICE, it's gone. Customs enforcement, gone. We're stopping deportations, it's gone. Oh, and incidentally, we're going to stop the interventions and imperialism in Latin America, as an example. Oh, and also, by the way, this has to be a labor deal. He does all of it. This is, to be fair, this is basically just as left wing.
We need ICE and Custom and Border Patrol. It is focused on real threats from terrorism, threats, container shipping. That comes into the United States, contraband that we need to worry about, fentanyl that we need to be focused on. There are places that we should focus for our safety. So I am...
Okay, and look, we have a border, there's going to be safety enforcement, but the point was recognizing that ICE, specifically as an organization, was fundamentally racist, fascistic, rotten, and irredeemable. And it was a whole slogan that everybody was running around, including a lot of the same people who had a whole active fantasy life about somehow Bernie. And my God, it got really crazy with some people. They even said that other people might be moving, like Harris or I forget all the rest, frankly, moving to the left of Bernie. They really were in fantasy overdrive because of whatever issues they have around Bernie. But his point is that ICE specifically needs to be dismantled. And I thought that was the slogan we were all chanting. Well, once again, as with everything else, one presidential candidate has put that on the table, and I think that's important to note. Can we do a quick bad before we get out of here? All right. We will do a very quick bad because it's media criticism. I apologize, guys. We have no time for questions and calls. We'll do that next time. And next time, we will certainly get to the 18th Brumaire and maybe even the German ideology. I'm excited.
Yeah, those are great works.
And we will also talk perhaps about Beatles or Rolling Stones. Actually, who is that? What, as he gets the tweet, what is your pick? Beatles or Rolling Stones? Beatles. That's the counterintuitive pick. I love it. All right, yeah, play the bad, and then let's just do this really quickly.
Looks like it could be something that will be not good. Believe me, not good. No good, really bad for you. But it looks like it could be something that will be not good. Believe me, not good.
He's such a character. Do we have it? Yeah. All right. So there's a coup happening in Bolivia. We've been talking about it. There's paramilitaries on the streets. The atrocities will only get worse. And a lot of people who've been being, twerps about this are going to be embarrassing themselves. New York Magazine put out this tweet. The unseemly end for Bolivian President Evo Morales serves as a cautionary tale for what happens when world leaders remain in office for too long. Now, my friend Andre Dumise made the very astute point that there are, you know who else has been in office since 2006, Professor Wolff, besides Evo Morales?
No.
A very prominent global leader by the name of Angela Merkel.
Yes.
And I believe that all of us would strongly oppose the German military removing her from office and burning down members of her family's homes. So this is the type of trash double standard journalism that normalizes what is really a horrific atrocity. And no leader need be perfect to not deserve this. In fact, on the opposite end of the spectrum, Morsi of the Muslim Brotherhood did not deserve the coup in Egypt. And I did not support him at all. I'm not even obviously Morales, there's a lot to support about, but coups are wrong. And we shouldn't be in the business of equivocating and normalizing them.
I mean, look at what Lula said in the clip we played earlier. Like, Bolsonaro won the election. We're going to have to abide by it.
He did that.
Yeah.
He said that. He also said in the same clip, though, he said the day before, he said, look what's happening in Bolivia. They won't accept when they lose.
Right.
And then he said, let Venezuela figure out Venezuela. Trump should take care of poor people in America and not come here to bust our balls. But there we are.
I also see this kind of clip. This is very American.
Yeah.
Very important to get away from class struggle, from class conflict, from the basic way the economy works, from the inequality, the grinding pot, and make this a political deed as if the length of time has to do. What the hell are you talking about? Why would you find, of all the deeper meanings of this kind of transformation, the history of coups, the history of intervention, all you can say is he was in there for a long time. I mean, it takes superficiality to a whole new level. I mean, and it's so gross that you realize really is a deflection. Get people to think not about all the real issues here, but about longevity in office,
It's a Martian came to Earth and said, why is this FDR guy seeking another term? What else is there to talk about?
Yes, I forgot to mention. Roosevelt was in term a long time. Maybe we should rewrite American history. That poor Roosevelt, we should have got rid of him earlier, because look how many years he was in.
Yeah.
And we've said it before. I mean, the whole
Term
point
limits
of
are
having
undemocratic.
elections is to decide who people want to be their leader. So that sort of makes term limits completely irrelevant.
I agree. And again, it's an assertion with zero evidence. I think, look, Evo's popularity had decreased. He only won 47% of the vote. He was actually a massive, overpoweringly popular leader. And he hung on because even for his mistakes, the stat that hits me is so much poverty cut, but when the average height of the citizens go up,
Yes.
just because of increased nutrition alone, and no one has any time for that here because they're, well, frankly, all too many. I mean, some are just fascist neighbors, and a fair amount of people are just brats, unfortunately. And
Also, they don't want to deal with the fact that our longevity in the United States has been going down for 3 years. Their longevity is rising. Ours is falling. What does that mean?
No.
I was surprised that you didn't bring up, unless you've done it on other programs,
Tell me.
Bloomberg.
You know what? We haven't done that yet. Do you want to tee off on Bloomberg for 2 minutes before you leave?
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. All right. Go for it. I love it. A Richard Wolff special.
Two things on Mr. Bloomberg.
Yes.
One, he's obviously, like the rumors about Mrs. Clinton, a recognition that the Biden candidacy is in deep doo-doo.
Yes,
And
indeed.
they have to find some way to hold on to some centrist, and having somebody with a big reputation, that would have been Clinton, or a big wallet, that's Mr. Bloomberg. That's the kind of logic that party functions with. But here's another one. I was asked on a program yesterday, what is Michael Bloomberg's legacy? And this might be an interesting way to think about it. Michael Bloomberg can never run for another office in New York City because his legacy. He was such a disaster that he has to run for something else because he can't be dog catcher in New York City. Why? Because he is the man who ordered the bulldozers to destroy Zuccotti Park, to get rid of the free public library that was in the milk crates that they had set up, to stop feeding the hungry and poor who came for food, free food there, and all the rest. But that alone, look, it was a coordinated thing. The Obama administration did it in 60 cities across the country the same day, the same hour. It was obviously a governmental operation. The same Mr. Trump, Obama, interesting slip, the same Mr. Obama who used to say to people I know were in his office that he'd love to be more leftist and radical, but there'd have to be a groundswell. He can't do it himself. There has to be support.
Sure.
This man then destroyed the most important potential support for what he said he needed. What? But not Obama tonight. Bloomberg. The day after he mowed down Zuccotti Park, he had a press conference, and the press asked him, look, you used violence. These people didn't use any. You violently destroyed what they had built there. And why did you do that? And because he's not the sharpest knife in the drawer, he answered in one of those ways that ended his career. He said, it's because they were making the park dirty.
Yeah.
The mayor of the filthiest subway system on the planet suddenly acquired an aversion to dirt. Just dirt over there. And the man said it was wonderful to watch, with the same smiley confidence that made you realize everything that comes out of that man's mouth is horseshit.
That's right.
And that's a legacy, and that's why he can never resurface here. And the mistake of putting something like that up for the Democratic Party is...
It only helps Bernie.
Yeah.
Run, Mike, run. He is a personification of every problem of our world. And I mean, the idea, I mean, talk about the power of ideology, that there are a lot of extremely affluent, extremely educated, extremely highly self-regarding people that really, truly think that, and even in ways that shouldn't matter, but let's be blunt, a short, charisma-free technocrat, oligarch, who is known primarily nationally for terrorizing people about drinking soda or smoking, is what the heartland is crying out for. I mean, that's really who's going to bring dignity back to the mill towns and the inner cities and the rural country. That is exact. I mean, I said this story in Majority Report, and I'll be really quick because I know we got to go, but several years ago, I was with a couple of friends, and one of their fiance, wonderful, I always kind of hate telling stories like this because she's great, but she was kind of giving the spiel of like, well, what about Michael Bloomberg? And I like what he's doing about guns. And me and this other guy who is a Republican strategist now from totally different ends were like, oh my God, that guy is a massive asshole. Nobody outside of the Upper East Side and the Joe Scarborough, green room is ever going to be interested in him. And this guy, one table down, literally had like the goatee and the tattoos and the da-da-da. And he, I'm sorry, don't mean to be rude. And then he kind of looks and he goes, Miss, I'm sorry, I don't want to be rude, but you got to listen to your friends because I hate that guy. And he went on a diatribe. And again, like a very normal, I mean, he liked Obama, but he owned a gun shop. I mean, he was all over the place, which is typical, I think, when you talk to actual normal people. But one thing that was very clear was he fucking hated Mike Bloomberg. Yeah. And I mean, the fact that he and the people around him and, idiots like Chuck Todd actually think that this is anything other. I mean, this is literally a avatar of a Bernie Sanders endorsement. Thank you.
Also, I live in the district in Manhattan where the woman who represented our district, I believe it was, she did, but I'm not sure. Quinn was her name.
Oh,
and she
Christine
got him.
Quinn.
She led the thing to allow him to circumvent the
term limits.
two-term limits, so he could run for a third time. Another lovely legacy. And when she then ran, that was some kind of deal. Then he supported her to run for mayor.
Yep.
And I remember in my neighborhood in Manhattan, in the weeks before the election, massive numbers of people in our neighborhood wore T-shirts that said, anyone but Quinn. And the reason was her association and her conniving with Bloomberg.
Isn't it just amazing, though, that, Giuliani led this vicious, racist, just a war on the New York underclass. And then Bloomberg came in, and then it was like phase 2, turned this into a giant money laundromat. Like we had, I mean, and the terrorism continued, but the Giuliani, just pure thug. Then Bloomberg came along, and I mean, it's disgusting. And I guess the best thing about him running for president is we can all be extremely clear about who he is and what his legacies are. Professor Richard Wolff, thank you as always. I'm so honored. Guys, on Sunday, Great conversation with Connor Kilpatrick. We're also going to be releasing video of the Pepe Escobar conversation soon. Spread the word. Appreciate you all.